Rebbe soll gesund sein began to Farbrengen this afternoon. And today is Shabbos, and it is Farbrengen, which is B'shayches with Shabbos Mevorchim. And this idea of Farbrengen Shabbos Mevorchim was introduced to us by the Frierdiker Rebbe. Though there were exceptions, Yechidei Sgula, who were aware of it prior to the Frierdiker Rebbe publicizing it, but in general it is something which was introduced to us by the Frierdiker Rebbe, the great inyan of having a Farbrengen on Shabbos Mevorchim. And a Farbrengen Bichlal is something very great, especially when many Yidden gather at one gathering. It's something which has a tremendous impact. How much more so is it when we are talking about a Farbrengen which is taking place on a Shabbos, because Shabbos in itself is also a very special day. And to find the specialty of Shabbos, the Rebbe says, we don't have to search too far. It's an open pasuk in Torah Shebiksav, something which every child is well aware of. A pasuk tells us, Vayevarech Elokim es Yom Hashvi, that the Rebbe put bracha into Shabbos. So Shabbos in itself stands for blessing, stands for bracha. Here we are talking about a Shabbos Mevorchim, so that is a yet greater inyan, a higher level. We're talking how Shabbos is not only for itself an inyan of bracha, Shabbos is instituting bracha for the entire month which we are blessing this month, and this Shabbos we are mevorech, we are blessing the entire month which we are entering into. So how great is this Shabbos? And especially it is known the quotation of the Alter Rebbe, that the Alter Rebbe expressed himself that a Chasidische Farbrengen can accomplish much more than Malach Mechal. Malach Mechal is known to be Sari Shel Yisrael. He's the Malach who is appointed to take care of all the needs of Yidden. So the Alter Rebbe is expressing himself that a Chasidische Farbrengen accomplishes even more than what Malach Mechal can accomplish. So this is the greatness of a Chasidische Farbrengen on Shabbos Mevorchim. And Rebbe added on, it is a Shas HaKosher, it is an opportune time for everyone at a Shabbos Mevorchim to Farbrengen to make decisions in whatever inyanim each and every one may select, and whatever inyanim he is seeking to improve himself. And this is an opportune time to select proper inyanim in what to improve, one should improve himself. As well, it is also a Shas HaKosher, meaning an opportune time that the inyanim which we select and we make decisions that we will improve ourselves into, these inyanim, this will be fulfilled. In other words, it will not only remain as a decision, this decision will be brought down into action. And as the Rebbe kept on stressing, Ha'maisa hu ha'ikar, action is what really counts, that not only should it remain in thought and in theory, but it should be brought down into a payil mamish, that these hachlotas should taka be fulfilled. B'negeya Shabbos Mevorchim Kislev, the month which we are entering, has many special inyanim. To us Hasidim, there is the inyan of Tes Kislev, Yud Kislev, Yud Tes Kislev, which is very meaningful to Hasidim. However, one of the most famous inyanim in the month of Kislev is the Yontif of Chanukah. At the minute when we mention Kislev, we right away identify Kislev together with Chanukah. What is the inyan of Chanukah? Chanukah is the inyan that there was the renewal of the Beis HaMikdash. There was a Chanukas HaMizbeach. Svarim tell us not only in Chanukah, on Chanukah was there the dedication of the Mizbeach, but even the Mishkan, which Moshe Rabbeinu built, really it was completed in the month of Kislev. In other words, the Chanukas HaMishkan, which Moshe built, formally all the inyanim, all the formalities until they began using it, this did not take place until Nisan. However, when was it that Moshe Rabbeinu completed the Mishkan? His completion was already in Kislev. So we see that the month of Kislev has a shaykhs to the inyan of Chanukas HaMizbeach. However, if we look at these two inyanim, here we will find the inyan of Mailam B'Kodesh. And this is something which a Yid has to remember at all times, how we constantly have to keep on going higher and higher in Kedusha. Chazal tell us that anything and everything which Moshe Rabbeinu made, Ma'aseh Moshe, that everything which Moshe has done is nitzchi, is eternal. So Memele, if we're talking about the Mizbeach, as well as everything else which Moshe bade in the Mishkan, it is something which is eternal. However, its eternity is a spiritual eternity. When we're talking about the Neiros Chanukah, which also took place in the month of Kislev, here there's the famous Chazal, which Chazal tell us, HaNeiros halalu einon b'teilam l'yoyla, that these Neiros, which we are sending as a result of the miracle which the Rebbeinu performed, the Nes of Chanukah, this is something which will be constantly and eternal. It is something which will never cease. We will always be lighting these candles. Einon b'teilam l'yoyla. However, the Einam B'Teilam La'olam, the eternity of these Neiros Chanukah, is a much stronger eternity than, rather the expression much more obvious, than the eternity of Ma'aseh Moshe. Ma'aseh Moshe is something which is, as far as we're concerned, it's in Ruchnis. We don't see the Nitzchis in it. However, this is something which we go through ourselves. We know every year comes Chanukah, and we send these Chanukah licht. And in Chanukah itself, we know that the whole inyan of Chanukah is based on a format of Mailam B'Kodesh. Each and every night we light an additional candle more than we did the previous night. This is the inyanim pshutim, the obvious inyanim of the Hayrayas, which we can derive from the month of Kislev. However, for us who are seeking inyanim as far as Pnimiyus HaTorah, it also has a very strong shaykhus to the inyan of Chanukah. Because we know Torah is compared to Mayim. Heikol Tzomar L'chula Mayim, Chazal tell us Torah is also symbolic for Mayim. Then we know there is a higher level in Torah, which is the level of Yayin, which is Rozin De'eraisa, Pnimiyus HaTorah. And as Chassidus uses the expression Rozin De'rozin, the real in depth in Yonim, the real Pnimiyus, the Pnimiyus of Torah, this is compared to Shem. As the Chassidus always stresses, the Gemara tells us, Shemen shetzof al gabi yayin, or Shemen shetzof al gabi mayim. If one was to take a drop of oil and pour it into a cup of water, or not only into a cup of water, but to take the oil and pour it into a cup of wine, the oil will always be outstanding. The oil will always be noticeable. It will swim up and remain on top. So this shows us, in the spiritual sense as well, what the inyan of Shemen stands for. Shemen is something which is Pnimiyus HaTorah. Rozeh de Rozeh. And here we are told that each and every Yid who this message reaches to, each and every Yid has a shaykhus to all of these inyanim. No Yid can exclude himself from it. Every Yid has his shaykhus to Pnimiyus HaTorah, to the Shemen of Torah, to the Rozin of Torah. And there is no Yid, as the Rebbe spoke later in the Farbrengen, referring again to this inyan, we'll get to it in a minute. There is no Yid that can say that he has no shaykhus to this. This inyan is too far from him or too abstract for him. He only has a shaykhus to easier in Yonim HaTorah. It is not so. Rebbe said, if we look back into previous generations, in the times of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, and he is known for his shaykhus to Pnimiyus HaTorah, however, the entire generation then did not have a shaykhus to Pnimiyus HaTorah. It was Rashbi was the one who was saying, and Rab Abba, his disciple, was writing what he was saying, and it was only an inyan which was limited to few people. However, in later generations came the Arizal, and the Arizal expressed himself with the expression, which is often quoted, mitzvah legalo zois hachachma, that nowadays it's a mitzvah to reveal the inyan of Pnimiyus HaTorah to everyone. However, even in the times of the Arizal, when he stressed the mitzvah legalo zois hachachma, still it was not everyone that had a shaykhus to Pnimiyus HaTorah. It was also limited to Yechidus Gul. Now biyameinu elu, when one can ask the question, Ach shadara bitmiye, is then this generation suitable for something which previous generations weren't? However, at the same time, the fact is that now we are demanded and we are told that our inyan now is yafutzu ma'inasecha chutza, to spread chassidus, that chassidus, which is this is pnimiyus HaTorah, rozeh de rozin of Torah, the shemen of Torah, and to take this shemen of Torah and reach out with it, that this shemen should reach all over. Later in the Farbrengen, as usual, the Rebbe learned a Rashi in this week's Sedra, as well as comments from his father, Levi Yitzchak, and the Zoya, and also referred to several other general inyanim which he discussed in previous Farbrengens. In the Chav Chesh from Farbrengen, the Rebbe discussed how important it is that when children are raised, not to show them or to keep away from children pictures or books that deal with non-kosher behemoths and chayes. And that the surroundings of children and the storybooks which children read and the games that children play with, it's extremely important that all these things should be from kosher animals and kosher behemoths. The Rebbe says, in Farbrengen, the Rebbe says we don't have to go far to look for a source for this. The Rebbe says the source is an open source. It's a source even in Nigla. It's a Gemara. Gemara tells us regarding Noshim Ksheros that when an Isha Ksheira would come out of mikveh, and if she would come out of mikveh, first thing she would meet would be a non-kosher behema, a chaya, what she would do is she would go back and tovel herself. So from here we see that these inyanim definitely have an impact. And how much more so is it when we're talking about raising children and we want to raise them properly, and derech Hashem, to grow up proper Chassidish children, it is of extreme importance that no behemoths v'chayis tmeya should be in their surroundings, even actually pictures or cartoons or whatever of it. So it seems like that in some sort of a correspondence, or in the Halasat Mimim or somewhere, the question was raised, what's about taking children to a zoo? Children go to a zoo, they're exposed to see all behemoths v'chayis, kosher and non-kosher as well. Is it proper or isn't it proper? So the Rebbe responded to that this afternoon. He says when children or people go to a zoo, sorry, there are two advantages in it. Firstly, there's an inyan where we have an opportunity to recite the bracha of Baruch Mishana Habriyas. This could be recited when one sees an elephant, when one sees a monkey. One can recite the bracha of Baruch Mishana Habriyas. Another hezbah the Rebbe gave is not a very practical hezbah. When one enters a zoo and sees the various chayas and behemoths, and everything which is in the zoo, this gives one a feeling and an understanding in the concept of Ma'arabu Ma'asecha Hashem, how many different creatures that HaKadosh Baruch Hu create, and how each and every one is different in his way, with his habits, and so on and so forth. However, one may go a step further. Rebbe says, and we'll say as follows. True, to go to a zoo, to be able to recite the bracha of Baruch Mishana Habriyos, fine. But if one should keep on entering a zoo pretty frequent and pretty often, then he doesn't have to recite the bracha of Baruch Mishana Habriyos each time. So therefore, once a person was in a zoo already and had an opportunity to recite the bracha of Baruch Mishana Habriyos, then there is no need for him or children to go back again to the zoo. Rabbi says this is an error, total error, and he compared it to another halachic example. We know that when we eat various fruits, besides making the regular bracha of Be'er Pri Ha'etz, Be'er Pri Adam, which is recited on a fruit, at times we have to make a shechayonu on this fruit. Why? Because it's an expression of satisfaction, of gratitude to the Rebishter that fruit is back to us in the new season. We hadn't had this fruit yet this season, so we express thanks to the Rebishter by reciting the bracha of shechayonu. Does it make sense for a person to say, once he has recited the bracha of shechayonu, and a shechayanu naturally, when he will eat the fruit again, he will not be able to make again a shechayanu. So he will say he will not enjoy this fruit again because the bracha of shechayanu he cannot make anymore. Memela, why should he go ahead and eat the fruit again? Naturally, in halacha, it's ridiculous for one to make such type of a calculation. Furthermore, not coming on only to the bracha of shechayanu, let's look at it from the bracha of a shehako, for example, or another bracha which is made. If one makes a shehako on a drink, the Rebbe says, let us take for an example, one coming to a Farbrengen, reciting a Be'er Pri Ha'gofen on the first cup of wine which he takes. And the Rebbe says, he's used the Yiddish expression, mattering the olam, tiring the olam, the crowd for at least 3 hours to sit through a Farbrengen. So Mamela, if one would have to say L'chaim again, Al Pi Halacha, he does not have to make another Be'er Pri Ha'gofen because this is still part of his Suda. So does it make sense for one to say he will not take additional wine, being that he already recited the bracha of Be'er Pri Ha'gofen? So Halacha limits him from making another Be'er Pri Ha'gofen. He's not mechuyev Al Pi Halacha to make another Be'er Pri Ha'gofen. So therefore he will say he doesn't want to drink any more wine. Naturally, it's ridiculous. What's the pshat? The pshat is he is not mechuyev to make a bracha again. But definitely, if he wants to drink wine or water, whatever the case may be, or whatever situation we may be talking about, he definitely is free to go ahead and drink. This is what the halacha said, that once he has to make the bracha and later he doesn't have to make a bracha. Halacha tells us that once a person eats the new fruit, he makes a shechiyanu, and goes by the entire season until the fruit is not renewed, he does not have to make a shechiyanu again. But this is no calculation for a person to say he will not enjoy this fruit, being that he cannot make the shechiyanu. The same, one will say he will not return to the zoo again, because this time he cannot make Mishana Abriyas anymore, because it's so often. He was there a while ago and he recited the Mishana Abriyas, so therefore he cannot make the bracha again, and this should hold him back from going to the zoo. This is naturally no cheshbon. And particularly that by going to a zoo and exposing children to showing them all the various chayis and behemoths and oifis, whatever is in the zoo, it again stresses the idea of Marabu Masecha Hashem. How great how remarkable and how many and different are all the bruyim, are all the creatures which the Rebbe created. Referring to various inyanim which the Rebbe discussed in previous Farbrengens, which questions were raised on, he referred to another inyan, which is also an inyan which was published recently in a Sikha, and that is the difference of Malchus Beis David as opposed to the Malchei Yisrael. That the Malchus Beis David was something which was lasting, durable. Their kingdom kept on going from generation to generation, and is something which will remain with Malchus Beis David. However, Malchei Yisrael is something which was temporary. The Rebbe explained it with what Chazal say. The Malchei Beis David, they were anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha. That is why it remained eternal. However, Malchei Yisrael did not have the Shemen HaMishcha. That is why it did not remain eternal. So some ask the question from the Rambam. Rambam uses the expression, where the Rambam discusses various inyanim melucha, Malchus. The Rambam expresses himself that there was a Malchus and it was an eternal Malchus. It was a Malchus Nitzchi, or another similar expression which the Rambam uses. So Rabbi is explaining. The Rambam talks not only about Melucha. The Rambam talks about any type of an appointment, regardless whether it is Melucha, or to the extreme opposite extent, a Reish Gargusa. A Reish Gargusa, the Gemara says, a Reish Gargusa mishamayu kamemanalei, meaning if somebody was appointed, in those days they would have a water carrier. This water carrier is also an appointment which comes min hashamayim. In other words, there's nothing which happens by itself. So the Rambam discusses all different types of appointments and all different types of positions. If a person was appointed to it, it is his appointment. Not only is it his, but should he pass away and leave children who are suitable for this appointment, they are prior to it than anyone else. This is something which the Rambam explains as so al pi halacha. That's the inyan of Yerusha, that they inherit their father's positions if they are suitable to fill this position. The fact that Malchus Beis David was eternal because they were anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha, this is not a halachic inyan, the Rebbe is explaining. This is something on top of halacha. This is an inyan of bracha, which they had with them in addition to the halacha. This was some special bracha, some special zgula, is hidden in the Shemen HaMishcha, that those malachim who were anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha, shenimshechu b'Shemen HaMishcha, and Malchus Beis David were the ones that had it, Memela it remained by them eternal. However, it doesn't mean, it's not a halachic inyan that mitzad halacha they were more eternal than Malchei Yisrael or any other types of appointments, whether it's like Aboyas or Hismanus or any other type of appointing. Any type of appointment is something which is eternal as well. However, the inyan of Shemen HaMishcha is something which only adds it adds on bracha, it adds on a special zgula, a special, something very special, something additional, aside of all halachic aspects. And therefore, being that the Malchus Beis David, they were the ones that had the children who were descendants of David, therefore, their melucha was something which had bracha into it, and therefore it lasted eternally, and will last eternally. However, how different is it? All other types of ismanus. But it is not something which is reflected in halacha. It's a special zgula which the Shemen HaMishcha brought and carried with it. Benegei the Rashi in this week's Sedra, The Rebbe is learning the pasuk. It's Toldos, where the pasuk is discussing how Rivka gave birth to Yaakov and Esav. It is Kapitel Chof Hei, pasuk Chof Daled. Pasuk says, "Vayimlu yameha leledes, v'hinei seimin bevitna." And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, that is when she gave birth to the twins. What does Rashi comment? Vayimlu yameha. Rashi quotes these words from the pasuk and comments, "Aval b'tamah ksiv." By tamah, it is written different. The pasuk there does not use the expression "Vayimlu yameha leledes," and her days were fulfilled. The pasuk only uses the expression "Vayehi be'eis lidata." It came the time when she gave birth. Why is there a difference in expression? So Rashi tells us, "Shelo yimalu yameha ki lezayin chadashim yoldasa." Tamah bare her children to 7 months. However, here it was different. We know the general rules in Rashi. When Rashi tries to point out a difference in expression between one pasuk and the other, when does Rashi usually do it? When we find the difference. The second time. Here it's actually the first time. Here we are still on Bereishis Chof Hei. Tamah's giving birth is a few sedres weiter on Bereishis Lamed Ches. So when the pasuk there does not use the expression "Vayimlu yameha leledes," but the pasuk there only expresses itself "Vayehi be'eis lidata," that is when Rashi should have raised the question and bring out that the difference of expression in the pasuk between Tamah and Rivka. Rashi doesn't wait. Rashi right away points out here in Parshas Toldos the difference of expression in the pasuk between Rivka and Tamah. And this is something which in Pshutei Shel Mikra requires interpretation. In Medrash, which is the source of Rashi, Medrash uses a different expression. Medrash uses the expression that by Tamah it was Choser, by here it is Molei. That's all the Medrash says. Medrash does not get involved in interpreting whether it was to 7 months or here it's Molei yameha leledes. Rashi does not, quote, minimize himself to the Lashon HaMedrash. Rashi explains it by Arichus, "Shelo yimalu yameha ki lezayin chadashim yoldasa." Rashi does not stress how is it here by Rivka. So the emes is that there's a Targum Yerushalmi. Targum Yerushalmi here on the pasuk. Targum Yerushalmi here explains that Rivka was pregnant with Yaakov and Esav for 271 days. That's what the Targum Yerushalmi says. And he explains it. The word hiroyon, pregnancy, in numerical value, is a total of 271. Hey is 5, Reish is 200, so it's 205. Yud is 10, so it's 215. Vav is 6, 221. Then we have the Langenun at the end, which is another 50, so it's a total of 271. That's what Targum Yerushalmi says. Rebbe says it is doubtful whether Rashi saw Targum Yerushalmi. In other words, Targum Yerushalmi was definitely written before Rashi. Question is, however, if those manuscripts were already discovered in the times of Rashi or were not. The basic grounds to say that Rashi was not familiar with Targum Yerushalmi, Rebbe says, is very simple, because Rashi refers to Unkelos many times. Rashi refers to Targum Yonasan ben Uziel many times. Being that he refers to them as a simon, he had access to them. The fact that throughout Chumash we do not find that Rashi should refer to Targum Yerushalmi, this in itself is an indication that Rashi never had access to the Targum Yerushalmi. In other words, in the days of Rashi, the Targum Yerushalmi was not popular, was not around yet. The emes, the Rebbe goes on to explain, really this is not the first Leida, this is not the first birth here in Chumash. If we go from Parshas Bereishis on through Parshas Toldos, there were Torah discussed many births. And never is it that the Torah used the expression Vayimlu Yamel Aledes, her days were full. Vayeled, constantly. One was born, another person was born. Actually, this type of an expression should have been used either the very first time when the Torah discusses the birth of a child, or being that the Torah wants to prove that Tamar bore her children to 7 months, so at the latest birth which is discussed, prior to the birth of Tamar's twins, that is when the Torah should have used the expression Vayimlu Yamel Aledes. And where is that? By Tamar herself, by her own previous children which she gave birth to. That is where the Torah should have used the expression Vayimlu Yamel Aledes. So we would see that there is an inyan of giving birth to full 9 months. As we know from Gemara, the Rebbe says, and it's even familiar to the child as well, not always is it the full 9 months, at times it is a little bit longer, at times it is less. However, why is it that right here, in the middle of this inyan, in the middle of Parshas Toldos, it's not the first birth which is discussed in the Torah, and it's not the closest birth, right next to the expression by Tamar, where the Torah uses the expression Vayhi be'es lidata, and Dafke here the Torah chose to express itself Vayimlu Yamel Aledes. God explains that as follows. If we go back a few psukim, we read in Pasuk Chav Beis, Vayisroitzutzu habanim b'kirba. The twins which she had within herself were struggling. And as Rashi comments, if she would pass by a house of Avodah Zarah, Esav would want to go out. If she would pass by a Beis HaMedrash, Yaakov would want to go out. So, we see that by Rivka, it was a special pregnancy. Torah Taka discusses many children being born until now. However, the Torah did not point out any other mother until now having any problems. Rivka had a problem. And this was a problem which caused her pain, caused her an extra pain which a normal woman until now did not have to go through. Memela, one would think that being that she had these extra pains of maybe she did not give birth to full 9 months, but she gave birth earlier than that. That is why Dafke here the Torah is stressing Vayimlu Yamel Aledes. Don't you think that because of Vayisroitetzu Abanim B'Kirba she did not have full days of Hiroyon? As we just mentioned, the Targum Yerushalmi, he says that the average and normal system is that it's full days of Hiroyon, which is 271 days. Don't you think so? Torah tells us no. Vayimlu Yamel Aledes. This was not taking into consideration the fact that V'yisroitetzu habanim b'kirba, and Rivka carried her children for full 9 months, and when were they born? Vayimlu Yamel Aledes. And that is why it is Dafke here that the Torah points out and stresses this inyan of Vayimlu Yamel Aledes. Rashi does not want to get involved in quoting the Targum Yerushalmi, even if he didn't see him. But Rashi did not see the Targum Yerushalmi, but the emes is, the inyan is discussed in Gemara. In Gemara there are various opinions, whether it's 270, 71, or 72 days, 272 days. Rashi is well aware of the Gemara. First of all, it's a Gemara which Rashi definitely knew every piece of Gemara. Besides that, in Gemara, Rashi is mefarish the sugya, so definitely Rashi was familiar with the sugya. However, Rashi did not want to get involved in it here in Chumash, because this is an inyan hashonoi b'machloikis, that in Gemara there are various opinions about it. So that is why, being that here there is a reason why the Torah has to use the expression of Vayimlu Yamel Aledes. There's good reason for it. Because of the Vayisroitetzu habanim b'kirba. Though it was Vayisroitetzu habanim b'kirba, still the Rebishter made that her children were born when it was fulfilled, full Yemei Leida. So that is why Rashi points out here the difference between Rivka and Tamar. The Negei the Zohar in this week's Sedra, it is a Zohar closer to the end of the Sedra, and the Zohar discusses what Yitzchak sent Esav to get him Shnei Gdoye Izim. Why Shnei Gdoye Izim? What does this represent? So the Zohar brings two opinions. One opinion the Zohar brings is that it's symbolic to the Korban Pesach and the Korban Chagiga. Zman Abayis, the Korban Chagiga had to be brought because the Pesach was insufficient. Why was the Pesach insufficient, the Gemara tells us? Because we know that a Pesach has to be eaten al hasoiva. When do we eat the Korban Pesach? When we are already full. Like today when we eat Afikoima. If there were many participants in the Korban Pesach, and each one would not get a big enough piece, so he wouldn't be really full when it came to eat the Korban Pesach. So that is why, in addition to that, there was also Korban Chagiga brought. So first they ate from the Korban Chagiga. Afterwards, once they were full, that is when they would eat the Korban Pesach. That is one explanation to Zohar. Another explanation to Zohar is that it has a shayches to Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur there was also two korbanos which were brought. One was La Hashem, the Shnei Seirim, and the other one which was taken by the Kohen La Azazel, which was thrown off the mountain. So symbolic for the Inyan of Yom Kippur, this was the Shnei Gdiyah which Yitzchak asked for here. The question was raised, Mefarshei HaZohar discussed this Inyan. One of the Mefarshim who discussed this Inyan is a commentary on the Zohar by the name of Ohr HaChama. The Ohr HaChama discusses it and explains it, also referring to the same Inyanim which his father here refers to. However, the Rebbe says he remembers that in the house there was no Ohr HaChama. The Sefer was not accessible in his father's area, so he knows that in his father's library there was no Sefer Ohr HaChama. So true, the Inyanim, as the Ohr HaChama interprets the Zohar and as Rabbi Levi Yitzchak interprets the Zohar, are the same, but it is that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was mechaven to the same interpretation as one of the Kadmonim, Mefarshei HaZohar, the Ohr HaChama. The question is raised, we know that the Avos observed all of Torah. The entire Torah was observed by the Avos. The Pasuk tells us, learn takop from a Pasuk in this Sedra, Eikev Hashashama Avram B'koili, the Rebbe says, Vayishme Mishmarti Mitzvoisai Chukoisai V'Saroisai, that being that Avram Avinu has observed all the mitzvahs and all the Torah, Kodesh Baruch Hu promised him that in turn for this he will bless him and his children. So Chazal derive from this that Avram Avinu fulfilled the entire Torah. And if Avram Avinu fulfilled the entire Torah, we must say that Yitzchak as well also fulfilled the entire Torah. Still, if so, the question arises, on Yom Kippur, if here we say that why did he ask for Shnei Gdoyizim? Because this symbolizes the Inyan of Yom Kippur when there was Shnei Seirim. If we're talking on Yom Kippur, how does Yitzchak go ahead on Yom Kippur and ask for food? How does he go ahead and send Esav that Esav should prepare a meal for him if these Inyanim have a shaychus to Yom Kippur? It says, same question will arise if we're interpreting it that it has a shaychus to the Korban Pesach. Why? When was the Chagiga needed? In order to be able to eat the Pesach ala Soiva. One should be full when it comes to eat the Korban Pesach. That is why they had an additional Korban, a Korban Chagiga. Here by Yitzchak asked for a meal for himself. Or at the most he would invite, whom else would he invite to the meal? Rivka, or his children. Very few people. Enough people that if they would share the Korban Pesach, they would become full from a Korban Pesach also. There's no need for them to have a Korban Chagiga as well. The only reason we have a Korban Chagiga is in order that the Pesach should be eaten ala Soiva. When do we need this? When there are many minuyim, when there are many participants in the Korban Pesach. Here there were not that many minuyim into the Korban Pesach that they should need an extra Korban, the Korban Chagiga. Therefore the Rebbe says, the Rebbe is learning that it doesn't really mean that it was on Pesach, on the eve of Pesach, and it doesn't really mean that it was on the eve of Yom Kippur. Either way we interpret it, it means that Yitzchak had an Inyan Ruchni where he wanted to symbolize these two Gdiyim which he asked Esav to bring him, whether according to the interpretation that it should have some sort of a spiritual shaychus to the Inyan of Pesach, or it should have a spiritual shaychus to the Inyan of Yom Kippur, but it doesn't really mean that on the calendar day that was neither Yom Kippur and it was neither Pesach. Rebbe says, why did he select to learn this piece of Zoya on this week's Seder? There are many inyanim in the Zoya with comments from his father in Parshas Toldos, because his father here adds on that there's a shaykhus between Yom Kippur and Pesach. How does he explain the shaykhus between Yom Kippur and Pesach? It seems like these notes, we know that these notes he wrote while he was in exile. He was sent away in far off Siberia, as we all know the famous story. He didn't even have ink or paper. It was the Rebbe's mother who manufactured her kind of ink, and when she was allowed to come to visit the Rebbe's father, she would bring him bottles of ink. That's how he had ink, and he had a few sfarim with him. He didn't have no paper with him. One of the few sfarim, he had a Sefer HaZoya and a Tanya. So these commentaries, which is written, which we have now, the Lekutei Levi Yitzchak on Zoya, this is really which Rabbi Levi Yitzchak wrote around the pages of Zoya in his own set of Zoya, which he managed to have with him while he was sent off from far off Siberia in exile. Rebbe stresses many times that is why many of the comments are really written extremely brief, because he had a technical problem. He couldn't elaborate in his writing. He didn't have no paper and he didn't have much ink. So whatever he was able to squeeze around the pages between the lines of the Zoya, that is how he wrote these comments. So it seems like this was written in the year 1940. So he expresses himself, Shalapa'amim at times, Bishana Mu'uberes, when it is a leap year, and he puts in parentheses, Kamay Hashata, like this year, the year when he wrote it, Shnas Tov Shin, the year of 1940, Koiren, Pashas Yom Kippurim, Shebe Pashas Achei, all the details about Yom Kippur is described in Pashas Achimois. And in an Iberya, we read Pashas Achimois, Koidem HaPesach, before Pesach. In the weeks in the Kriyas HaTorah, it comes out that Pashas Achei is read before Pesach. So this is how he ties in his shaykhs between Pesach and Yom Kippur. Rabbi says this year is also an Iberya, so we will be reading Pashas Achei also before Pesach. So that's why he selected it's appropriate to learn this piece of Zoya, which expresses an inyan of an Iberya, a leap year, where we read Pashas Achei before Pesach. It is suitable to learn this inyan tonight, this afternoon. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe again referred to this inyan which was discussed earlier, how in Torah there are various levels. There's the level of Mayim in Torah, and then we go to Yayin, and then we go to Shemen, which is Rozin, the highest level of Torah, secrets of secrets within Torah. And this has a shaykhus to each and every Yid. The Rebbe says there are those that think that when we approach a Yid and we tell him all about Torah and all the details of Torah, we are burdening him. We come upon him, we hit him so hard, telling him that Torah possesses that many things within it, until the highest level of Razin in Torah. Why approach a person that way? Being that the person until now was not familiar with Torah, let us give it to him in a very, very easy manner. And if we will give it to him piece by piece, not telling him about the Razin of Torah, not telling him about Mimis HaTorah, it obviously may be more of a proper way. Rebbe says it is not so. Torah, as we recite, is Torah Tziva Lonu Moshe Meirasha Kehilas Yaakov. Torah is an inheritance to each and every one of us, regardless whether we know about it or we don't know about it. Only thing is, there are some Yidden that are familiar, they know that it is our inheritance, and there are some Yidden that don't know. Rebbe says, could you imagine? One will inherit a tremendous factory. This is what his ancestors, his parents left. However, being that this individual is not familiar with the operation of such type of a factory, we will not tell him about it, and we will not turn it over to him. We will keep him totally away from it until he will be educated and brought up to such a level where he will be able to go into this factory and really appreciate it. It is definitely not so. If it's something which is an inheritance, it is immediately and automatically his. I kept on stressing this very strong, how each and every Yid inherits all of Torah. And there's no chelik in Torah which does not have a shaykhus to any Yid, chas v'shalom. In other words, every Yid has a shaykhus to each and every chelik in Torah. Whether we are talking about lower levels in Torah, or we are talking about the Razin, which is what Chanukah stands for, which is the union of Shemen, the Shemen of Torah, Pnimis HaTorah, union of Chassidus in Torah. And it is our obligation of Yefutzu Meinasecha Chutza to spread Chassidus and bring these inyanim of Torah as well as all inyanim of Torah and mitzvahs to each and every Yid. As the Rebbe got into speaking, to another inyan. This Shabbos, as well as the next 2 days, there's a national convention going on here of shluchim from all over the United States. Here the Rebbe discussed the great inyan of a shliach on one hand, how great it is, and the Rebbe stressed at many occasions that a shliach is totally associated with the meshaleach, to the highest extent, to the fullest extent. It is not just that we say that his act of shlichus, when he does an act of shlichus, that is when he is associated and tied with his meshaleach, but even at all times, if he is only a shliach who is acting accordingly, the Rebbe says, if a shliach does not act accordingly, then naturally his ties with his meshaleach are just not there, automatically not there. However, when a shliach acts properly and understands that treating another person is also important properly, and respecting another person as well as it should be. Rabbi used the expression that when a person has negel, the nails of a person, in a spiritual sense it means to be shtechik, to be itchy to others. Rabbi says the negel, being itchy, that should be, one should keep and hold to himself. To others, we should not treat with our negel. Others we have to treat b'seva panim yafis, and treat them properly and treat them accordingly. And that is when the shaliach is really and fully associated with the mishaleach. Rabbi referred to David HaMelech. David HaMelech, we know, resembles Sfiras HaMalchus. David HaMelech resembling Sfiras HaMalchus. It's explained in the Chassidus that Shlomo HaMelech is referred to as Chachma of Malchus. Shlomo is always known for his great Chachma. However, David, Rabbi used the expression, was the shliach of Sfiras HaMalchus unto this world. It's not my union to say pshetlach, but amongst Hasidim it's always acceptable that when looking on the shalshelas of the Rabbeim, the Alter Rebbe, Sfiras HaChochma, Mittel Rebbe, Sfiras HaBina, Friedeke Rebbe being Sfiras HaYesoid, Hasidim always regard to this, the Rebbe soll gesund sein, as Sfiras HaMalchus. And the Rebbe, and back to the union, Rebbe kept on stressing the importance how a shliach is supposed to act. And when a shliach, who carries a tremendous responsibility on himself, and when he acts accordingly, and treats other people accordingly, not that when he comes into a city or he comes into a country or to an area, immediately thinks that he's the person that can step over everyone. And even over those who were there prior to him and were there before him and have positions there, but how he feels he's a shliach. And if he's a shliach, he has the right to do anything and everything. The Rebbe says this is not so. The Rebbe says, when does a shliach succeed? When he has before him the concept of Tamim Tiyeh Im Hashem Elokecha. When he goes out to fulfill the Rebishter's will. And if he knows that he goes out to fulfill the Rebishter's will, and the will of the Mishaleach of those that sent him, then all the obstacles, the internal obstacles as well as the outside obstacles, mebifnim mebachutz, keil zara shebekir b'cha, the obstacles which are created by the Yetzirah, will not interfere, and he will be able to go ahead and succeed tremendously. Rebbe added, the key to success by a shaliach is when he goes out to work with simcha. And it is very obvious. Shaliach and sameach are the same gematria. Numerical value. The word sameach, which is simcha, happiness, joy, and the word shaliach, total the same. So this shows us that when a shliach goes into action, he has to do it with a tremendous amount of simcha. The Sedra we began reading this afternoon to Mincha Vayetze, in other words, in Shabbos, in the time of Raiva the Raivin, this Sedra tells us that Yaakov Avinu, Vayetze Yaakov, Sarashi comments, Chazal comment, he was told the Psura Tova, he was told the good news, and he immediately began going with simcha, began going with joy. So when one goes with joy, he's extremely successful. And the Rebbe adds, why Taka do we call him Shaliach? Why don't we call him Sameach? Let us refer to him as Sameach. The Rebbe says, we will stress too much the inyan of simcha, it'll be too obvious, and then the Yetzirah will be able to get hold of him, and then he will really spread himself all over and step upon everyone, over everyone's heads. So the inyan of simcha is there, and it's definitely required, but it is there, not so obvious. The word how we refer to him is in the form of, we refer to him as a shaliach. But he has to know that his Inyan is also to be besimcha. And when he approaches his Inyan besimcha, that is when he's successful. Talking about these Inyanim, the Rebbe says he would like to touch another Inyan, which he feels he has to talk about. And there's various shluchim, which are sent in Talmidei HaYeshivas, Bacharim which are sent to various yeshivas in the country here as well as abroad in other countries, as well as Bacharim from other yeshivas who come here to learn in this yeshiva. He says the inyan of a yeshiva Bachar is that when he comes to the yeshiva, his inyan is to be a Talmud. And a Talmud means that he has a Hanhola, and there are Mashgichim and Mashpiyim who are on top of him, and Hanhola who is on top of him, whom he has to adhere to. When a Bachar thinks, or a Koilel Yungaman who was sent to a various Koilel, thinks that his inyan in the Koilel is not only to act as a Talmud, but he's coming in to straighten out Inyanim, and he's coming in to teach the Hanhola what they should do. And he's coming to a point who is suitable to be a member in Hanhola and who is not suitable to be a member in Hanhola. This, the Rebbe says, this is not the goal why Bacharim are sent to various yeshivas, a Koilel Yungalite are sent. The inyan why they are sent is to sit and learn and raise the standards of learning wherever they are sent to, and not for any other Inyanim. If they feel there is some sort of a problem, let them sit down face to face with a Mashgiach, with a Mashpiyah, with an Hanhola, whoever it may be, and discuss the problem with them. If they feel the problem could be ironed out, fine. If for whatever reason, the Rebbe says, they feel that they cannot iron out the problem, and taking in consideration how much we are demanding the inyan of Avas Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael, because we are now in Ikvizid Mashiach, and now we have to correct the sinas chinam, which was the cause for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. We now have to correct it not only with Avas Yisrael, but with Achdus Yisrael, total unity amongst Yidden. And here we are talking about these Talmidei Yeshiva, or these Shluchim who feel, who are there as Shluchim and feel that they cannot really fulfill their Shlichus because they are not getting along as it should be with the Hanhola who is in these particular places. Then the Rebbe says, go ahead, nem dein pekel, take your bags, pack him, and leave. The inyan is not to be in a place and not fulfill your shlichus. You're there to fulfill a shlichus, then the shlichus has to be fulfilled. And fulfilled in what type of a way? Showing an example how a shlich should act, and fulfilling it in a way which is totally in response to not only Avos Yisrael, but to Achdus Yisrael. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe gave 2 bottles of mashke, 1 bottle of mashke for the Pegisha, which is taking place here this weekend, and also again stressed this great inyan, how Torah is an inheritance to each and every Yid, and this is something which this message has to be carried to every Yid, that everyone should know that he has a shaychus to Torah, and Torah is his, and literally just like a Yerusha, belongs to the one who is inheriting it, without any questions or doubts whether he is suitable at the moment to it, or he's not suitable to it, where he knows how to administer it, or he does not know. The same Torah is Torah tziva lanu Moshe me'rosha kehilas Yaakov. I gave another bottle of mashke as well for the kinus for this national convention of Shluchim, which is taking place. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen with the word from the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov says, based on the pasuk, Im b'chu koisai teleichu v'nasati gishmeichem beitam. Pasuk tells us if we shall follow the drachim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Torah and mitzvahs of the Rebbe Rebbe constantly referring to a expression in Chazal. Chazal tell us that Torah and mitzvahs are the shluchim of the Rebbe. It's the emissary of the Rebbe to us. Rebbe uses the expression kabdu as ha mitzvahs, honor the mitzvahs, sheheim shluchai. The mitzvahs are my emissaries. So Chazal, the Baal Shem Tov touched on the pasuk in B'chu koisei teleichu, if we will go and fulfill the Ratzon of Hashem Yisbarach, the pasuk says v'nasati gishmeichem beitam. The Rebbe will see to it that he will give the rain in time. So the Baal Shem Tov touched gishmeichem stemming from the word gashmius. That when a Yid is mekayim, the B'chu koisei teleichu, then the Rebbe sees to it that the gashmius of a Yid is fulfilled fully. That a Yid has whatever he needs in all areas. And Bana, Chayim, Mezainen, in all of these areas, Bekulu, and all of it, in a way of Revicha.
Go, make it. Go ahead. Gematria what?
Excuse me. Gentlemen. There's one more announcement. There's a sefer on the brink of being translated into English. It's called My Hanukkah, written by my neighbor Shalom Horowitz. It's a book of halachas and basically Lubavitch Minhagim about Hanukkah, but it's in Yiddish. He's translated already into English, but he's low on publication costs. So if anybody would like to make a contribution for this Hanukkah, will be out if we can get the money raised. You can come to me now, or if you want, send look on the tzachlis for Shalom Horowitz or by Shalom Horowitz, Montgomery Street.
Tonight it's on the Sunday. There's a big Lava Malkin, a big Suda, which is the Suda Saidah for the Rebbe's Olga Sunshine, which marks today's date, Chodesh Kislev, 6 years ago, when the Rebbe went home for the first time after being ill. And tonight is a tremendous Lava Malkin, 770, and everyone should participate.
Rabbi Katz, I got your plate for you.
Excuse me, you tell me Rayon is the matter of what? Rabbi Katz,
Can I borrow your pen for a second?
Rayon.
Next door.
Rayon.
Let me just get this
Pregnancy.
Pregnancy, yeah.
Is it a matter of what?
Official.
271.
It's going to be the same thing.
271.
Okay, should go.
I'll get you in a second.
It's going to have the same preparation again? Or the same thing? Right. 9 o'clock? Oh, tomorrow? Not tomorrow night, but 9 o'clock. Tonight announcement for tonight. There'll be an announcement for tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. Rabbi Weinberg will be bringing over tour across the street in English. And it's very good. It's one of the older Hasidim. It's very able and very learned.
Rabbi Weinberg will give his own Farbrengen tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you're in town, are you in Morristown?